Hollowford was the kind of town where time seemed to move slower than everywhere else. A cluster of wooden houses leaned against the wind, their paint peeling like skin left too long in the sun. The streets emptied before nightfall, shops closed their shutters early, and the few taverns that remained open went quiet the moment the church bell rang 9 times. It was as if the whole town was holding its breath, waiting for something unseen. At the edge of Hollowford, half swallowed by weeds and crawling vines, lay the abandoned railway station. The wooden platforms sagged, the glass windows were shattered, and the clock above the tower had stopped long ago, forever frozen at 3 a.m. Children who wandered too close claimed they could still smell the iron and coal of an old steam engine, though no train had run through Hollowford in over 40 years. People avoided the subject, but whispers carried through taverns late at night. Some swore they had heard the distant horn of a train when the town was drowned in silence. Others described the screech of metal wheels against rusted tracks, a sound so sharp it could slice through the stillness of the midnight air. The brave ones who had gone to the station at that cursed hour were never seen again. Their names were spoken carefully, as if calling them might invite something terrible back into the room. Ethan Cole had never believed in such stories. At 28, he was a journalist known for chasing urban legends and breaking them apart with facts. Ghost lights, haunted houses, cursed wells, he had exposed them all as tricks of the mind, mistakes, or deliberate fraud. When he first heard of Hollowford's phantom train, he smiled to himself. Another tale from another forgotten town, another myth to unravel. But when he stepped off the bus and felt the cold weight of Hollowford's silence pressing against him, a flicker of unease crawled beneath his skin. The town seemed hollow, drained of colour, and yet every corner of it seemed to be watching him. He dismissed the feeling, adjusted the strap of his leather satchel, and made his way toward the inn where he had rented a room. The innkeeper, a gaunt woman with silver hair, slid the key across the counter without a smile. Her hands trembled when Ethan mentioned the railway. "You didn't come here for that nonsense, did you?" she asked, her voice sharp and weary. Ethan grinned politely. "I came here for the truth." Her eyes hardened. "The truth? The truth is that good men, women, even children have gone missing near that station. That's all the truth you need." She refused to say more, and Ethan climbed the creaking stairs to his room with her words echoing in his mind. Missing people, disappearances, a train that never was. It was the perfect story. That night, long after the town had gone silent, Ethan sat by the cracked window with his notebook in hand. He was about to jot down his first impressions when a faint sound reached him. At first, he thought it was the wind, but the longer he listened, the more certain he became. It was the long, mournful wail of a train horn, distant but unmistakable. His chest tightened. He leaned closer to the window. Somewhere beyond the fog, down the overgrown tracks, metal groaned against metal, the sound of brakes grinding against rust. Ethan's hand froze on the page. The clock on his nightstand struck 3 a.m. The next morning, Hollowford was wrapped in a dull grey sky. Mist curled through the narrow streets, coating the town in a damp chill that seemed to seep into the bones. Ethan awoke with the memory of the train horn still echoing faintly in his mind. For a brief moment, he wondered if it had been a dream, but the notes in his journal told him otherwise. 3 o'clock a.m. Horn, screech of brakes. He packed his recorder and camera, determined to start with the townspeople. If Hollowford held a story, someone would talk. The tavern was the first place he tried. A handful of old men sat at their usual table, staring into their mugs of dark ale. Their faces were lined like cracked earth, their eyes dim but wary. When Ethan approached with his notebook in hand, conversations died instantly. "Morning," he said with forced cheer. "I'm here researching the history of the old railway." "Do any of you?" One of the men spat on the floor before Ethan could finish. "History's buried," the man muttered. "Best left that way." Another man, older, leaned forward. His hands trembled as he lifted his mug. "You heard it, didn't you?" Ethan blinked. "Heard what?" The old man's cloudy eyes sharpened for just a second. "The horn." Last night, the others shifted uneasily, their boots scraping the wooden floor. "Might have," Ethan admitted. "That's why I'm here. To understand it. To write about it." The tavern keeper, a broad-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, slammed a glass down on the counter. His voice was harsh, final. "Leave it alone. People vanish when they go looking for answers." The air in the room grew heavy. Ethan closed his notebook slowly, realizing he would get nothing more from them. Still, the old man's words gnawed at him. "You heard it, didn't you?" That evening, Ethan wandered toward the outskirts of town. The station's tower loomed in the distance, a broken silhouette against the dying light. The closer he walked, the colder the air grew, as though the land itself recoiled from the tracks. He stopped by a small grocery on the way, where a woman with tired eyes was sweeping the floor. She glanced at him as he passed, then quickly looked away. "You're the outsider asking about the train," she said without turning her head. Ethan hesitated. "Yes. Do you know anything about it?" The broom froze mid-sweep. "Only this: don't be near the station when the clock strikes 3. She finally met his eyes, and there was no mistaking the fear etched into her face. "My brother didn't believe in ghost stories either. He went there once. He never came back." Before Ethan could ask more, she shook her head sharply and retreated into the back of the shop, shutting the door behind her. That night, Ethan lay awake in his room at the inn. The silence outside was suffocating, broken only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. His rational mind insisted it was all superstition, mass hysteria, the town feeding on its own fear. Yet, the horn he had heard still haunted him. He told himself he wouldn't go near the station. Not yet, but when the hands of the clock pointed to 2:55 a.m., he found himself already on his feet, pulling his coat tight against the cold. The urge was stronger than reason, as if the night itself was drawing him toward the tracks. By the time the clock struck 3 a.m., Ethan stood at his window, staring out into the mist, and once again, the wail of the train horn tore through the silence of Hollowford. The next morning, Hollowford wore its usual mask of silence, but Ethan could not shake the unease pressing against his ribs. The sound of the horn still throbbed faintly in his ears, as if it had stitched itself into his memory. At the breakfast table, he sat with his notebook open, scribbling fast notes before the details slipped away. His handwriting was jittery. 3 o'clock again. The horn lasted longer. The glass in the window rattled. Either someone is orchestrating this elaborate illusion, or something is wrong here. The innkeeper set a plate in front of him, her thin lips pressed into a hard line. "Stop writing about it," she said sharply. Ethan looked up, startled. She did not blink. "Words have weight in Hollow. The more you talk of that train, the closer it comes." She turned away before he could respond, leaving him with a growing chill in his stomach. Later, determined to chase facts instead of phantoms. Ethan made his way to the town's library. The building was nearly as decrepit as the station itself, with ivy crawling up its stone walls and windows that looked as if they had not been cleaned in decades. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decayed paper. He requested historical records, and after a long pause, the librarian reluctantly unlocked a drawer of old newspapers. Her eyes, pale and unblinking, followed him as if she were handing him a loaded weapon. He worked through the fragile stacks until his fingers were stained with yellowed ink. The headlines were like a repeating curse. Local boy missing near station. 1984. Farmer disappears without a trace. 1991. 2 teenagers vanish. 2003. Each case eerily similarly seen near the abandoned tracks. Never found again. One article, however, made him stop cold. Conductor vanishes during midnight run, -1979. It described how a freight train, decades after passenger service had ended, rolled into the next town unmanned. The doors were wide open, the brakes screeching, but the conductor was gone. No witnesses, no explanation. Someone had underlined the time in red ink. 3 a.m. that evening, Ethan returned to the tavern. He was greeted by silence, the same suspicious eyes tracking him from the corner table. He asked careful questions, but most of the men shook their heads, refusing to speak. One frail, trembling man finally lifted his gaze and said, "Thomas Grady, that was my brother. He drove the trains until the night they drove him." The others hissed at him to stop, but the old man continued, voice breaking. "They said the train came into the station without him. My mother swore she still heard his voice calling out from the tracks at night. The horn isn't just a horn, boy. It's a mouth. It calls you, and once you hear it clearly, it never lets go." His ale spilled from his shaking hand. The tavern keeper barked at him to hush, and the man shrank into silence. Ethan left unsettled, his notebook full but his heart heavy. The streets were already deserted, lamps glowing faintly through a curtain of mist. He told himself he would go straight back to the inn, but his feet carried him toward the station instead. Each step felt inevitable, as if the night itself was steering him. The platform groaned beneath his boots. His flashlight swept over broken posters, faded smiles, advertising routes no one remembered. The tower loomed above, the clock frozen at 3. And then he saw it at the far end of the platform, a figure, tall and motionless in the fog. "Hello." His voice cracked the silence. The figure did not move. Its shape was blurred, yet he thought he saw the tilt of a conductor's cap, a hollow face beneath. He took a step forward. The outline shimmered like smoke caught in moonlight and then dissolved into the mist, leaving only emptiness. Ethan's breath came fast. The silence broke with a low, drawn-out wail that shook the air. The horn, louder than he had ever heard it, dragging against his nerves like a blade. The ground trembled. The rusted rails beneath the weeds vibrated as though something massive were rolling across them. And then the light appeared, 2 pale beams cutting through the mist far down the track. They grew brighter, closer, accompanied not by the rumble of wheels but only the endless scream of the horn. Ethan's legs refused to move, his flashlight quivering in his grip. The light swelled until it burned his eyes. Then in an instant, it vanished. The platform fell silent. The vibrations ceased. The horn was gone. He staggered back, trembling, until he could breathe again. There was nothing before him but the empty tracks, overgrown and dead. Yet his skin still felt scorched by the phantom glow when he finally returned to the inn. The innkeeper was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She took one look at him and said flatly, "You saw it." He tried to steady his voice. "It was real. Real enough to take you," she said. "That's how it begins. First the horn, then the lights, then the train itself. And once you set foot inside," she shook her head, "you never wake in your own bed again." Ethan went to his room with her warning lodged in his mind. He sat by the window, watching the fog creep across the fields toward the dark line of the station. He told himself he was here for truth, that no curse or ghost could deter him. Yet even as he wrote the words in his journal, he felt the weight of the horn lingering in his chest. Holliford's train was not just a story, it was waiting for him. Ethan barely slept. When dawn finally dragged its pale light over Holliford, he felt as though he had aged 10 years in a single night. The notebook on his desk was filled with frantic lines written in the dark, half-coherent phrases that barely captured what he had seen. Light, conductor, horn, not a horn, mouth, calling. He read them back to himself, each word tightening the coil of unease in his chest. He knew he could not ignore it now. Whatever haunted Holliford was more than whispers and tavern gossip. Something lived in the ruins of that railway, and if he wanted answers, he would need to dig deeper. The library gave him fragments. Newspaper articles told of missing children, vanished workers, and a conductor who disappeared from his own train. But they didn't explain why. Holliford had a history, older than the station, older than the tracks themselves, and there had to be someone who remembered it. That afternoon he found himself standing outside a weathered farmhouse on the edge of town. A woman at the grocery had muttered an address to him the night before, almost regretfully, as if she knew she was sending him into danger. The farmhouse sagged with age, its shutters hanging loose, its paint long gone. An old man sat on the porch in a rocking chair, smoking a crooked pipe. His eyes, cloudy yet sharp, followed Ethan as he approached. "You're the outsider," the man rasped. "Yes," Ethan admitted. "My name's Ethan Cole. I'm here to understand what happened on those tracks." The old man's mouth twisted into something between a sneer and a smile. "Understand? You don't understand the train. You survive it, if you're lucky." Ethan sat on the porch steps, lowering his voice. "Please, people have told me stories, but I need more than stories. What's really out there?" For a long time, the man said nothing. He puffed on his pipe, smoke curling like ghosts around his head. At last he leaned forward. "They built those tracks wrong. Too much blood in the earth. The company cut corners, paid no mind to the graves they disturbed. Accidents started, early workers crushed, burned, drowned in the swamps under the bridge. They buried them quick and cheap, no prayers, no names, and the trains rolled on." His voice sank. "But the dead don't like to be forgotten." Ethan's pulse quickened. "You're saying it's the workers? The dead?" "I'm saying the line itself is cursed. Steel and wood and stone soaked in blood. The first conductor, Thomas Grady. He wasn't the first taken, just the first anyone noticed. They say he walks with the train now, still calling out, trying to finish his run." The old man's gaze locked on Ethan's. "Don't listen when he calls. If you hear your own name on the wind, it's already too late." The words stuck in Ethan's mind long after he left the farmhouse. He walked back through the quiet streets of Holliford, notebook heavy in his pocket, the weight of too many warnings pressing on him. The more he learned, the less sense it made, yet the more undeniable it became. Something was there, something that fed on the town's silence and fear. By nightfall he was back at the inn, but rest was impossible. He sat at his window again, eyes fixed on the horizon where the tracks disappeared into the fog. When the clock in the hallway struck 3, the horn came once more, long, low, a sound that felt like it rose from beneath the earth. This time, Ethan didn't just hear it. He heard something else woven into it, faint, broken syllables, almost like a voice struggling to form words. He pressed his ear to the glass, heart hammering. For a moment he swore it said his name. He stumbled back, knocking over the chair. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He told himself it was imagination, the mind twisting sound into meaning. But when he looked back through the window, he saw them, 2 pale beams cutting through the mist, growing brighter, closer, until they lit up the fields like a ghastly dawn. The glass rattled. The floor trembled. Ethan clutched the window frame as the unseen train thundered past. He felt the air move, cold and sharp as a knife. And through it all, voices, dozens of them, layered together, whispering, screaming, calling. Some cried for help. Some cursed. Some laughed with madness. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the light vanished. The vibration stopped. Silence fell heavy and complete. Ethan collapsed into the chair, drenched in sweat. His pen rolled from the desk, landing at his feet. He picked it up with shaking fingers and forced himself to write. The train is not just sound and light. It carries them. The missing. I heard them. I think I heard myself. Sleep did not come for the rest of the night. When morning finally arrived, the town seemed smaller, the faces of its people tighter with fear. And Ethan knew one thing with absolute certainty. He could not stop now. The train was waiting for him, and sooner or later he would have to face it directly. Ethan could no longer pretend he was an observer. Each night the train drew closer, its presence pressing harder on his chest, leaving him raw with sleeplessness. He walked Holliford streets like a shadow himself, searching faces for some acknowledgement, some hint that they too heard the horn, saw the lights. But whenever he tried to speak, the townsfolk recoiled, their eyes dropping to the ground, their mouths snapping shut like traps. Silence was their armor, and he alone had broken it. On the 5th day, rain began. It fell in a steady curtain, drumming against the inn's roof, soaking the dirt roads until they turned to black sludge. Ethan sat by the window again, watching the water pour down, when the innkeeper's boy appeared at his door. The boy was thin, pale, and spoke as though he feared someone listening. "You should leave, sir," the boy whispered. "People who chase the train, they don't last." Ethan crouched to meet his eyes. "You've seen it, haven't you?" The boy flinched, glancing at the hallway behind him. "I heard it. My uncle, he went to the station one night. Said he was going to prove it was just wind and stories. He never came back." His throat bobbed as he swallowed. They found his shoes on the tracks. Just the shoes. Before Ethan could reply, the boy darted away, footsteps fading like a retreating heartbeat. That night, the horn came again, deeper and longer than before. Ethan didn't wait for the lights. He grabbed his coat and flashlight and ran through the rain-slick streets, past shuttered houses and locked doors, toward the station. His breath came sharp and uneven, every step pounding with the rhythm of approaching wheels. The station loomed out of the fog, broken and skeletal. Weeds choked the platforms. The roof sagged. Yet, as Ethan stepped onto the old boards, he felt the vibration, the low, rolling tremor of a train about to arrive. His flashlight beam jittered across rusted rails and shattered glass. Then the mist ahead split. The lights came first, two pale orbs burning like dead suns. They glared through the fog, cutting a path straight down the tracks. Ethan's stomach turned cold. He could hear it too now, the roar of iron, the shriek of brakes, the crushing rhythm of wheels. Yet there was no train. The rails were bare. Still, the lights swelled brighter, and with them came the figures, shapes clinging to the air like smoke, half-formed, their faces blurred. Dozens of them lined the platform, men and women, children too, their bodies shifting in and out of sight. Their mouths moved in silence until suddenly the wind carried the sound to him, wave of voices, desperate, hungry, pleading. Help us, stay with us, join us. Ethan staggered back. His flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered on the boards. One of the figures, tall and broad-shouldered, broke from the rest. His uniform shimmered faintly in old conductor's coat, its brass buttons dull with age. His face was a ruin of shadows, but his eyes burned with a pale, unnatural light. "Ticket, sir." The voice was a rasp, hollow and echoing, as though spoken through a tunnel. "Step aboard." Ethan's breath froze. He forced words out, though his throat felt tight. "You're Thomas Grady, aren't you?" The figure tilted its head. "Once. Now I am what the line made me. We keep rolling, sir. Always rolling." His hand stretched toward Ethan, fingers too long, too thin. "Come along. You've heard the call. You belong to us now." The platform shook violently. Ethan's heart hammered against his ribs. He stumbled backward, his boot catching on a broken plank. The voices swelled around him, rising in a fever pitch. He thought he saw his own reflection among the shifting faces, his mouth open in a silent scream. "No," he whispered, though the words sounded weak even to him. The conductor moved closer, the stench of smoke and iron filling the air. His hand brushed Ethan's shoulder, cold searing into his skin like ice. In that instant, Ethan's body rebelled. He tore free, lunging for his flashlight, and bolted down the platform. The voices howled behind him, echoing in the mist. He didn't stop running until he was back inside the inn, slamming the door shut behind him, chest heaving, water dripping from his clothes. He pressed his back against the wood, shaking uncontrollably. The innkeeper, roused by the noise, appeared at the top of the stairs, her face ashen when she saw him. "You went to the station," she whispered. Not a question, an accusation, a verdict. Ethan could not speak. His lips trembled, words caught in the tide of everything he had just seen. He only nodded once. The innkeeper's eyes darkened. "Then it has marked you. God help you, stranger. God help you." Ethan dragged himself to his room, collapsing onto the bed without removing his wet clothes. He lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, every nerve alive with fear. He could still feel the conductor's touch burning into his skin, hear the phantom voices echoing in his head. And worst of all, when sleep finally pulled him under, he dreamed of iron wheels, endless tracks, and his own reflection pressed against the glass of a train that never stopped. When he woke at dawn, the mark was still there, faint. Dark bruise on his shoulder, shaped like a hand. The bruise on his shoulder darkened as the hours passed. Ethan stood before the cracked mirror in his room, tracing the outline of that unnatural handprint. The skin was cold to the touch, colder than the morning air drifting in through the window. He had slept poorly, his dreams filled with wheels grinding over bone, with voices whispering his name in endless repetition. No dream had felt so real before. He dressed quickly, every motion stiff with unease, and left the inn without speaking to the innkeeper. Her warning echoed in his mind. It has marked you. He needed to know what that meant, and he could not find answers within the walls of a silent town that looked at him as if he were already gone. The library drew him again, though its shelves had yielded little before. He lingered in the archives, rifling through brittle clippings and forgotten records until the dust made his throat burn. It was then he found something buried at the bottom of a box, a ledger, its spine cracked, pages curling at the edges. It had belonged to the railway company. Most of the entries were mundane shipments logged, tickets sold, wages recorded. But toward the end, the handwriting grew erratic. The conductor's name appeared again and again. Thomas Grady, notes about delays, complaints about his behavior, rumors of him speaking to passengers who weren't there. And finally, a line scrawled across an entire page. He hears them. He won't stop. He says the dead ride with him. Ethan's stomach churned. He turned the page. There was one final entry, dated the night of the last train ever to run through Hollowford. It read, Grady swore he would finish the journey, no matter what it cost. The train left at 3. It never returned. The words pulsed on the paper like a heartbeat. Ethan shut the book, his hands trembling. There was a pattern here, something beyond a curse or a haunting. The train was trapped in repetition, forever trying to complete a journey it could never finish. And anyone who saw it, anyone who heard its call, was dragged into that endless loop. He left the library at dusk, the ledger's image still etched in his mind. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and heavy, the sky bruised with gathering storm clouds. The town felt deserted, windows shuttered, doors bolted. Only a few figures moved in the streets, slipping quickly out of sight as Ethan passed. As night fell, he felt the pull again. His feet carried him to the edge of town, where the tracks cut across the fields like black veins. He stood there long after darkness swallowed the landscape, staring into the fog. The horn came, low and mournful. The rails trembled beneath his boots. This time he did not run. He forced himself to stand still, to breathe, to face what came. The lights pierced the mist, closer than ever, blinding in their intensity. The roar of the phantom train filled his ears, so loud it seemed to shake the marrow in his bones. Figures swarmed the platform again, their shapes clearer now, their faces more distinct. Ethan saw eyes wide with terror, mouths open in endless pleas, and then he saw her, a woman near the center of the crowd, her face pale but whole, her gaze locked on him. She raised a hand, not beckoning, not demanding. Her lips formed words he could not hear, but he knew what she said. Help me. Something inside Ethan broke. He took a step forward, heart pounding. The conductor appeared again, coat shimmering, eyes blazing. His voice rose over the chaos. The journey continues. Step aboard. Ethan's legs trembled. The woman's hand reached toward him, her eyes desperate. He felt the bruise on his shoulder burn, a searing pain that nearly brought him to his knees. The air reeked of smoke, of rust, of old blood. And then the platform split. For the first time, Ethan saw the train itself. Not just lights, not just sound, but the shape of it looming through the fog, an engine black as midnight. Cars stretching into infinity, their windows filled with pale faces pressed against the glass. The wheels sparked against the rails, though no metal touched them. The smoke billowed, though no fire burned. It screeched to a halt before him, the doors sliding open with a hiss. Inside, shadows writhed. The conductor extended his hand once more. "The ticket is already yours." Ethan's breath came ragged. His body swayed, every nerve screaming to flee, yet some deeper pull dragged him forward. He saw the woman again, her face framed in the doorway, her eyes begging. Behind her, the other passengers shifted, their voices rising in a chorus that shook the night. "Join us. Join us. Join us." The bruise on his shoulder burned hotter, like a brand. Ethan staggered closer to the open door. The world beyond seemed to fade, the town, the fields, even the sky. All that remained was the train, endless and eternal, waiting for him to step inside. And as his hand brushed the cold iron of the doorframe, he realized with chilling clarity the choice was slipping from him. The train wanted him, and it would not stop until he was aboard. Ethan's legs trembled as he stood before the open doorway of the phantom train. The air around him thick with the scent of rust, smoke, and something fouler he couldn't name. The woman inside pressed her hand against the glass, eyes wide with terror and hope at once. The crowd behind her swayed, a writhing mass of pale faces, mouths moving in silent screams. The conductor's hand hovered in front of him, impossibly long, fingers curling toward Ethan like the claws of some unseen predator. Every instinct screamed at him to flee, to turn and run into the empty fields, to escape Hollowford and never return. Yet some invisible thread pulled him forward, each step heavier than the last, as if the train itself had routed him to the spot and was drawing him inexorably into its maw. He could feel the bruise on his shoulder throbbing, pulsing in time with the distant, mournful horn. It burned like fire, searing through bone and muscle, leaving nothing but a raw, aching hunger in its wake. Sweat ran down his temples, mingling with the rain that had begun to fall again, slicking his hair to his forehead. Ethan took a breath, the chill of the night seeping into his lungs. His hand reached toward the cold iron of the doorway, trembling violently. As soon as his fingers brushed the surface, the world seemed to fracture. The mist around him thickened, the fog curling like smoke through the broken air, twisting and coiling, forming shapes that writhed and beckoned. The woman's mouth moved again, silent words that Ethan somehow understood. "Come, save us, hurry inside." The train was like nothing he had ever imagined. The air was thick, almost liquid, pressing against him, forcing him inside. The interior shimmered with a faint, sickly light that did not illuminate but seemed to crawl over the walls, the seats, the faces of the trapped souls. Figures sat in rows, pressed together unnaturally, their eyes hollow yet burning with faint glimmers of life. Each face told a story of terror, of endless waiting, of hopelessness stretching across decades. The conductor was there, his figure impossibly tall and lean, coat glimmering, eyes fixed on Ethan with that same cold, hollow stare. "Sit," he said, his voice echoing as if carried through tunnels and caverns. "The journey is beginning. You cannot leave until the end." Ethan's stomach turned. He wanted to speak, to protest, but words lodged in his throat. He wanted to run, but his feet moved of their own accord, carrying him to a seat near the woman. The second he touched it, a shiver ran through the floor of the train, like it was alive, like it had known him all his life and had been waiting. The doors slammed, shut behind him with a sound that shook the very walls, reverberating in his chest. The horn screamed, a sound so deep it seemed to pierce the fabric of the world itself. The train lurched forward, though Ethan saw no engine, no tracks beneath the wheels. The car rolled through mist and shadow, past landscapes he did not recognize, passing through forests that whispered and fields that shimmered with ghostly light. All around him, passengers stirred. Some whispered desperately, reaching out, pleading with him. Others remained silent, eyes empty, waiting for the inevitable. The woman next to him grasped his hand tightly. Her fingers were ice cold but real enough to anchor him, and her eyes burned with unspoken terror. "They're not all gone," she said softly, voice quivering. "Some of us are still here. Don't let it claim you." Ethan tried to ask questions, but the words died in his throat. He could feel it, the train itself watching, alive in ways that made his mind rebel. Every seat, every strap, every bolt seemed imbued with intent, pressing him, warning him, demanding obedience. He realized in that moment that the line was not just a curse. It was a prison, a vessel for the dead. And now he was its newest passenger. The train moved faster, though he could see no motion beneath the wheels, only a blur of shifting landscapes and the ever-present fog. Time seemed to stretch and twist. Seconds became minutes, minutes stretched into hours. Ethan felt disoriented, as if he were losing himself in the rolling void. Faces blurred, whispered names filled his ears, and the horn cried endlessly in the distance. The woman leaned closer, her whisper urgent. "You must remember your name, your life outside. They feed on forgetfulness. Forget, and you are theirs forever." Ethan clenched his teeth. He would not forget. He would not yield. He pressed his eyes shut, clinging to memory, his family, his home, the smell of rain on earth, the taste of morning coffee, the voice of his mother. Every detail anchored him as the train howled and twisted through the shadows, trying to pull him under. Hours or perhaps days passed in this rolling nightmare. Faces turned toward him, some pleading, some accusing, all reaching. He felt their sorrow, their rage, their despair, a crushing weight pressing against his chest. And still, the conductor moved through the car, a silent shadow, observing, waiting, ensuring none escaped the inevitable. Ethan's resolve hardened. He would survive this. Somehow, some way, he would uncover the truth and escape the cycle that had claimed so many. And he would not let the lost souls become like him, not if he could help it. The train screeched and twisted, rounding corners that defied reality itself. Shadows stretched along the walls, whispers filled every inch of space, and the woman next to him clutched his hand tighter. Somewhere deep inside, Ethan realized the train had chosen him for more than observation. It had chosen him as part of its story, part of its endless journey, and the journey had only just begun. Ethan gripped the edge of his seat as the phantom train hurtled through impossible landscapes. The air inside the car was thick, choking, as if the fog outside had seeped into his lungs. Faces pressed against the windows, pale and distorted, some mouthing his name, others screaming silently. The woman beside him held his hand tighter, her eyes wide with fear, but she gave him the faintest nod of encouragement. He had to survive this. He had to see it through. The conductor moved silently down the aisle, his form a shadow against the shifting light of the car. His eyes burned with a cold, unnatural fire, and every step he took made the train groan like it was alive. Ethan felt a pull from him, a magnetic force drawing him toward the front of the train. He knew that if he followed, he would confront the source of this nightmare and, possibly, his own doom. Summoning all his courage, Ethan rose from his seat, every step heavy as though the floor itself resisted him. The passengers turned to watch, their hollow eyes filled with longing and despair. The woman whispered urgently, "Do not look away. Do not hesitate. Remember who you are." The train's interior twisted as he walked, the walls stretching and bending impossibly. Shadows slithered along the ceiling, and the distant horn echoed, calling him forward. The front of the train seemed to stretch into infinity, a corridor of darkness and light intertwined, pulling him toward a single point where the conductor awaited. At last, he reached the head car. The conductor stood before a massive window through which the tracks vanished into endless mist. His hand extended, fingers curling as if to grasp Ethan's very soul. "You've come far," the conductor said, voice low and hollow. "But the journey is not yours to end. Only completion matters." Ethan swallowed, forcing words past the knot in his throat. "Completion of what? Why are you doing this? Why?" The conductor's gaze did not waver. This line was built on blood, on lives forgotten. We were the first to vanish, the first to endure, and now we carry the weight of all who were taken. The train runs for them, for the unremembered. Completion is their release. A sudden clarity struck Ethan. The endless journey, the horn, the lights, the passengers, it was all a cycle of remembrance. The train existed to give form to the lost, to keep their stories alive. And yet it demanded a toll. Those who saw it, those who heard it, could be trapped in the cycle forever. Ethan clenched his fists. "Then I'll help you. I'll remember them. I'll make sure they are not forgotten." The conductor studied him, a flicker of something almost human crossing his shadowed features. "Very well," he said slowly. "But understand this. To save them, you must confront what has been buried. You must ride to the end of the line, past the fog, past the tracks you know, into the place where the first vanished." The train shuddered violently, the horn screaming one final, piercing cry. The lights outside coalesced into a tunnel of shimmering mist. Ethan stepped forward, the woman beside him, and together they advanced toward the final journey. Faces of the lost whispered their gratitude and their fear. Reaching toward him as if to guide him, the air thickened, and for a moment Ethan felt himself pulled under, drawn into the train itself. But he held on to memory, to the threads of his life outside Hollowford, and the faces of those who had vanished. He felt the weight of history pressing on him, the accumulated sorrow of decades, and he carried it with resolve, letting it guide him forward. Finally, the train slowed as it approached the end of the line. The mist parted, revealing a station unlike any Ethan had ever seen. The ground was dark as tar, and the air shimmered with cold light. Figures lined the platform, their forms solidifying, faces clear for the first time. Among them, Thomas Grady waited, his expression unreadable, the burden of the lost reflected in his hollow eyes. Ethan stepped forward, each movement purposeful. The conductor nodded once, and then the shadows began to recede. Faces that had haunted the train's interior now smiled faintly, some vanishing into the mist with relief. The woman held his hand, eyes glistening with tears. "We are free," she whispered. Ethan felt a hand on his shoulder. The bruise that had burned for days faded, leaving only a memory of pain. The conductor's voice was soft now, almost human. "You have chosen wisely. You remember, you carry the weight, but it no longer consumes you. The mist swallowed the train. The lights dimmed, and for the first time, the rails were empty. Ethan stood alone at the station, the wind whipping against his face. Holliford lay quiet behind him, as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew the truth. The town, the train, the vanished they had left a mark on him that would never fade. He walked back toward the village, steps slow but certain. The horn would not call him again, not tonight. And though the memory of the journey would haunt him forever, he carried with him the knowledge that he had completed the story, that the lost were remembered, and that he had survived the train that should never have been. Ethan disappeared into the grey morning of Holliford, the mist curling around him like a final whisper of the horn. And though the town slept, unaware, the tracks remained, silent and waiting for the next call, the next listener, the next story yet to be told.